In the blistering heat of the Montana badlands, where the wind howled like a wounded animal across endless stretches of parched earth, Jack Harlan gripped the reins of his weary horse, his eyes narrowing at the horizon where a plume of dust signaled trouble. The year was 1887, and Jack, a man carved from the rugged stone of the Wild West, had long ago buried his heart alongside his wife and infant son in a shallow grave behind his dilapidated ranch house. But on this fateful afternoon, as a band of ruthless outlaws crested the ridge, their guns glinting under the merciless sun, Jack felt the old fury stir within him, a beast chained for too long, now rattling its cage. "Stop looking," he muttered to himself, echoing the words his dying wife had whispered years ago when he'd searched desperately for a doctor who never came. "Take it off, take off the mask of civility, the veneer of defeat that had kept him alive but hollow." In that moment, the rancher unleashed, spurring his horse forward into the fray, his actions about to rewrite the story of a forgotten soul in the unforgiving frontier. If you believe in kindness and second chances, like this video, drop a comment below, share it with a friend who needs a reminder of hope, and subscribe to Gentle Hearts for more stories that touch the soul. Jack Harlan's life had not always been one of isolation and quiet rage. Born in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, he had once been a dreamer, a young man who tamed wild mustangs with a gentle hand and built a homestead with visions of a bustling family filling its rooms. His wife, Eliza, with her laughter like a mountain stream, had been the light that guided him through the harsh winters and failed crops. Their son, little Tommy, barely 2 years old, had toddled across the wooden floors, his tiny fingers clutching at Jack's boots. But fate, cruel and indifferent as a prairie storm, had swept through one fateful night when a fever ravaged the land, claiming Eliza first in a delirium of sweat and whispers, then Tommy in the cold hours before dawn. Jack had ridden for miles, his horse foaming at the mouth, begging for help from distant towns, but the doctors were too far, the remedies too late. In the aftermath, he returned to the ranch a broken shell, the land that once promised abundance now mocking him with its barren fields and creaking windmill. He worked from sunup to sundown, his muscles aching, his mind a whirlwind of what-ifs. Why hadn't he seen the signs sooner? Why hadn't he fought harder against the invisible enemy that stole his world? Neighbors whispered about the cursed rancher, avoiding his gaze when he rode into town for supplies, his face etched with lines deeper than the canyons that scarred the earth. Jack built walls, not just around his property with thorny fences, but around his spirit, vowing never to let vulnerability creep in again. Yet, deep down, the pain festered, a wound that refused to heal, turning his kindness into bitterness, his hope into a silent scream that echoed only in the empty barns where memories lingered like ghosts. As the years dragged on, the Wild West evolved around him, with railroads snaking through the valleys and new settlers claiming land that once belonged to no one but the wind. Jack watched from afar, his ranch a forgotten outpost where cattle roamed listlessly and the house sagged under the weight of neglect. He had taken to wearing an old leather vest, patched and worn, as if it could shield him from the emotional storms that raged inside. But trouble, like a coyote scenting weakness, found its way to his door. It began with rumors in the nearby town of Silver Creek, whispers of a gang led by the notorious Black Bart, a scar-faced outlaw who preyed on isolated ranches, rustling cattle and leaving destruction in his wake. Jack ignored the tales at first, drowning them in the monotony of his daily chores, mending fences that always seemed to break, herding steers that wandered too far, and staring at the faded photograph of Eliza and Tommy on his mantle, the glass cracked like his resolve. One evening, as the sky bled red with sunset, a stranger appeared at his gate, a young woman named Clara, no more than 20, her dress torn and her eyes wide with desperation. She had fled from Black Bart's clutches, she claimed in hushed tones he overheard from his porch, having been captured while traveling west to join her ailing father. Clara begged for shelter, her hands clasped in plea, but Jack turned her away, his voice gruff and unyielding, fearing that opening his door would invite more loss. She camped nearby anyway, her fire a flickering beacon in the night, and over the days that followed, she persisted, offering to help with chores in exchange for scraps of food, her quiet determination chipping at the fortress he had built. The challenges mounted like gathering thunderclouds. Jack's ranch was already teetering on ruin, a drought had withered the grass, leaving his herd gaunt and vulnerable. Black Bart's men began circling closer, their shadows lengthening across his land as they scouted for easy prey. Clara's presence stirred unwelcome emotions in Jack, memories of Eliza's compassion, the way she had nursed sick animals back to health with tender care. He caught himself watching Clara as she mended a torn saddle or tended to a lame horse, her movements graceful despite the hardship etched on her face. But struggle defined his days. Nights plagued by nightmares where he relived the fever's grip on his family, waking in a cold sweat to the howl of wolves, arguments with himself over whether to help Clara or drive her off for good, and the growing threat of the outlaws, who rustled a few steers one moonless night, leaving tracks that led straight to his doorstep. Jack's internal battle raged. He wanted to remain numb, to let the world pass him by, but Clara's stories around the campfire, shared reluctantly at first, peeled back layers of his isolation. She spoke of her own losses, a mother gone too soon and a brother lost to the mines, her voice trembling yet resolute, mirroring the pain he buried deep. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, things began to shift. Jack found himself sharing tools with her, teaching her how to read the land's signs, the way clouds foretold rain, the tracks that warned of predators. A fragile bond formed, like green shoots pushing through cracked soil after a rare downpour, challenging his vow of solitude and awakening a flicker of purpose he thought long extinguished. Suspense built as the outlaws, noose tightened. Whispers in town turned to warnings. Black Bart had set his sights on Blackwood Ranch, drawn by tales of hidden gold from Jack's prospecting days, a myth, but one that fueled greed. Clara, sensing the danger, urged Jack to seek help from the sheriff, but he refused, haunted by the futility of past pleas. One stormy afternoon, as lightning cracked the sky like gunfire, Black Bart's gang descended, their horses thundering across the plains, rifles raised and demands barked into the wind. Jack, spotting them from the barn, felt the beast within stir once more, the unleashed rage of a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. He grabbed his old Winchester, the wood smooth from years of disuse, and positioned himself behind a stack of hay bales, his heart pounding not just with adrenaline but with a raw, emotional torrent. Clara, refusing to hide, stood by his side, her presence a reminder that isolation had cost him dearly. The confrontation unfolded in a haze of dust and shouts. Bullets whizzed past, splintering wood and grazing flesh, Jack's shots precise from muscle memory honed in younger, wilder days. In the chaos, he was hit, a searing pain in his shoulder that blurred his vision, but it was then, as Clara dragged him to cover, tearing strips from her dress to bind the wound, that the words echoed in his mind again. Stop looking, take it off, take off the shackles of grief, the armor of anger that had imprisoned him. The turning point came amid the gunfire's roar. Black Bart himself advanced, his scarred face twisted in mockery, taunting Jack about his pathetic little life on a dying ranch. But Jack, bloodied and cornered, unleashed not just violence but a flood of pent-up emotion. He charged forward, disarming one outlaw with a ferocious tackle, his actions fueled by years of suppressed sorrow turning into defiant strength. Clara, grabbing a fallen pistol, fired a warning shot that scattered the gang, her bravery mirroring the spirit Eliza had once shown. Together, they turned the tide. The outlaws, expecting an easy mark, faltered under the rancher's raw fury and the unexpected alliance. As the last of them fled into the retreating storm, Jack collapsed against the barn wall, his body racked with pain but his soul, for the first time in years, feeling the weight lift. In the days that followed, the town hailed him as a hero, the sheriff rounding up the remnants of the gang based on Clara's testimony. Jack's ranch, once a symbol of decay, began to revive. Neighbors offered help with the herd, rains finally came to quench the thirsty land, and Clara stayed on, not as a stranger but as a companion who helped rebuild the house, room by room, infusing it with life. Jack visited the graves behind the house, not in despair but in quiet reflection, whispering apologies and promises to live fully again. The scars remained, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they told a story of resilience, of a man who had unleashed his demons and then acted, with kindness, with courage, forging a second chance from the ashes of the Wild West. As the sun set on a renewed Blackwood Ranch, Jack Harlan looked out over the thriving fields, Clara by his side, knowing that true strength lay not in solitude but in the bonds that mended broken hearts. If this story has touched your heart, reminding you of the power of redemption and human connection, please like, comment, and subscribe to Gentle Hearts. Your engagement means the world and keeps these tales alive. Before we end, I'd love for you to comment below with the line, "I believe in second chances," if Jack's journey resonated with you.